Hi, this is Naroki5. I am going to be doing this until I die or I find something better to do. So please help me achieve this personal and, I think, noble objective by contributing to my Patreon or Subscribe Star. Link is down below. Every little bit helps. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Red Pill Nation number 391. This is the spare parts episode. This is the episode that I've been meaning to do now, probably for the better part of a couple of months now. V was supposed to be joining us, but V either isn't around or hasn't woken up yet. So he will join us if he can. But if he doesn't join us, well, we're just going to have the show without him. What we are going to, if V does jump in at some point before we're done, then we will get into the internet side of things. But because it's just myself and Roger Hansen, we are just going to stick with Hollywood. Although I'm going to be straight up with you, Disney is going to be a huge part of this. Disney is going to be a very huge part in this because of everything that's going on. In fact, we discussed Disney last night on our show, and that is going to be, if you haven't gone and listened to that section, and yeah, when this gets posted up, Red Pill Nation 390, it is topic number is it again? I'm trying to remember here. Oh yeah, topic number 4, 20630 in. If he's but I understand that YouTube only comprises like 3% of my listening audience, but I do include the timestamps in every single one of my social media posts that are digital content, which would be BitChute, MGTOW TV, Rumble, Odyssey, Brighteon. The link will be up. I haven't been doing a whole lot of posting up by other social media sites, but I mean, I am active. There is a Red Pill Nation group at Facebook Minds in MeWe. I am also active at Gab and Getter as well. That's where you can find me. I'm also available at Patreon as Naroki5. I haven't actually been over to that Patreon for a while. I mean, I've got to point out here, I'm not necessarily doing this specifically for the money. But I mean, at some point, as this thing that I'm working on, even though at one point I did get my YouTube channel completely shut down, at some point, as this thing continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, I will have to get to the point where I'm going to have to start like doing this full time. The aim is to do it full time, right? I want the Red Pill Nation and the Naroki5, the moniker I use, to be my sole source of income. I will eventually get there, but yeah, baby steps. That's all I got to say. And Roger knows all about not also choosing to not do it through YouTube. Roger Hansen told me something about his experience with YouTube recently, and it was like, yikes. Man.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
So it's like, yeah, I'm not putting a lot of faith in YouTube. I'm going with alt media. It's going to take longer, obviously, but I think in the end it will probably be worth it, because at that point I will be, short of the police breaking down my door and hauling me away to a political prison, I will be virtually uncancelable. So what is the topic? So yeah, the topic tonight, I call this the spare parts episode. There's supposed to be 2 parts, and if V does join in, we will get around to doing the internet side of things. There's plenty of stuff to talk about over there. if you're wondering if YouTubers are people who do shows online are any moral or any more principled than the individuals who work in the film industry, they're not. But as for now, we are just going to confine ourselves to Hollywood. Now, the current, and we were discussing this last night, the current lay of the land, or the state of the union in Hollywood right now, based upon a guy sitting on the outside looking in. You 2 years ago, two Oscars ago, you had Will Smith basically go up and slap Chris Rock on stage. He wasn't actually escorted out of the audience immediately, and he was given a standing ovation when he got his award later on that night, which kind of explains the hypocrisy of how Hollywood operates. The going back even further, and I haven't seen the movie that it was based on, which apparently is just a feminist claptrap. I'm actually going to have, now that I think about it, I actually have that movie sitting somewhere. I'm going to have to watch it, even though it is basically a feminist hit piece. There was a situation with Harvey Weinstein, and Weinstein was based upon some of the stuff that I'm gonna keep this really brief because there's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to cover today. Weinstein was apparently be an asshole to the barista type of a Hollywood guy, and I am literally, I would like to say that I'm shocked and aghast that this guy was able to last as long as he did. The unfortunate part is that more than likely, I've heard some less than praising accounts, for instance, of Steven Spielberg and some of the stuff that he is involved in, for instance, but it hasn't been uncovered because Steven Spielberg apparently is his opinions don't go to the sexual side, at least as far as it's been revealed so far. But I mean, we also have the situation with what the hell is the guy's name? You know, you'd figure I know the guy's face. I can't remember the guy's name. The guy from American Beauty and L.A. Confidential. What's the name of that actor? Do you remember?
You talking about what's his name? The one that was supposed to be gay?
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
No, I can pull up his name. I should know his name too because I remember he Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey. Thank you, Kevin Spacey. You also got the rather mysterious deaths and disappearances and reluctance of people to testify when Kevin Spacey suddenly came under. We will be discussing that as well. The deaths and disappearances and people suddenly deciding to change their mind about testifying against Kevin Spacey and how all of that just kind of like conveniently happened within about a year's span. That's another one. You've got Isaac Cappy and the response to him. You've got the knowing the way that actors are either totally woke or they just remain mute, silent about political and social issues, and perhaps that might be for the best, given the fact that regardless of the fact that they're performers and regardless of the fact that they're well paid, I mean, at the end of the day, not even 150, 200 years, not even 150 years ago, perhaps maybe even in less time than that, these guys would have just been nothing much more than circus clowns. and riding around in covered wagons going from town to town being circus performers for the most part. There would have been a few exceptions to that, but I mean, yeah, right. Like they're the jesters. You've also, but I mean, you've also got the rampant wokeness and the absolutely astronomical damage it's done, in particular post COVID. What I mean, if there's anything that if any positive, I'm going to bring out of COVID back in from 2020 to early 2022, it's the fact that it hastened the downfall of Hollywood probably about maybe even as much as 10 years. Because I mean, I gotta keep pointing something out here. You know, most of the studios were basically on hold for a couple of years while COVID was going on. There were a couple of movies that got released, but for the most part, everything was on hold. And when they came back, it just it was just a disaster. We will probably cover that as well. But I mean, getting back to the beginning of this, and I'm sorry, Roger, I should have allowed you to introduce yourself. So before I get into Disney, I will let Roger introduce himself, and I will let Roger do his opening monologue before we get into Disney. So Roger, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name's Roger Hanson. You can find me on Skype and Discord. I sometimes go on minds.com, but not as much anymore. I'm also on X, formerly Twitter. You can find me there as well. I do my streams on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and I have videos that are going up on BitChute, but I have no idea how that started. But I do have an account there, and I guess they started posting from my main account on there, so I'm not complaining about it. But you can find my stuff on BitChute as well. Here lately, I've also been live streaming on X. I decided to try out X Premium, and so far I've been putting up content there and everything. So that's about all I have.
All right. Any comment about any of the opening stuff about Hollywood before we get in? I mean, our first target is obviously going to be Disney.
Well, Disney is they do have an interesting scope on it, but another thing that I think is interesting is the whole story behind an open secret, the documentary that came out back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2010. Also, I think that the whole deal with Corey Haim is something that needs to be brought up as well, because like a lot of people aren't aware of it, but he literally accused Charlie Sheen of being the one that molested him, and Charlie Sheen just got in trouble here recently. Well, not recently, but over his show Two and a Half Men, apparently with AIDS, I guess it was. So
Yeah, that was a few years ago now, but continue. Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that are really caught up in that situation, which I think is important too. So, but yeah, those are the things that really have caught my attention when it comes to that, So, but right now I'm just going to follow your lead and go off of Disney and everything.
Okay, so before we so yeah, let's start out with the granddaddy of them all. Let's start out with Disney. Now, the issue, I think the really big issue is that I mean, on Sunday nights when I was a kid, The Wonderful World of Disney was like an almost a must watch for the kids in the house. Like it was usually Sunday night. Wonderful World of Disney would come on from like 6 or 7 till 9, and then what would immediately happen afterwards is that we would be go like, within about an hour or so after watching Wonderful World of Disney, we would start getting ready to go to bed, and we would be in bed about an hour or 2 hours after Wonderful World of Disney came on, And then it was like, yeah, that was usually, at least in my household anyway, Wonderful World of Disney was the signal that the weekend was over, pretty much, and that we're going to be going back to school tomorrow. That's what Wonderful World of Disney signaled in my house. Now, I did notice, for instance, that in the 80s with Disney, what Disney was doing a lot of in the 80s is that they were doing a lot of live action, and some of the stuff they did was actually very interesting. Some of it was even kind of funny. The Shaggy DA the remake of Shaggy DA, for instance, was one of the funniest goddamn things I ever see. I still cannot watch that movie without laughing my ass off. That was a live action shot, I believe, in 1980. There was also Witch Mountain. They did a lot of live action. What they were doing was they were every single year they would take one of their older classic movies like Cinderella or Snow White or Snow White and the Seven Dwarves or Sleeping Beauty or or The Wizard and the Stone. Well, actually, I got a very interesting story about The Wizard and the Stone, by the way. But I won't get to that. And what they would do is Disney was shooting a lot of live action, and they were just basically re-releasing their older cinematic, like old animation classics over and over and over again. Um, Getting back to not the sword and the, I think it was Fantasia. Disney chose to release Fantasia the same at the same time that Star Wars came out. And there was also another animated classic done by Ralph Bakshi, which is a little bit more adult oriented, called Wizards, which was also a very good movie. And at one point, I was agonizing between whether I wanted to go see Star Wars for the second time or whether I was going to go see Wizards, and I got outvoted, and we decided to go see Star Wars again. That's a decision I don't regret. But I mean, yeah. But getting back to the original point, in the 80s, Disney was slowly starting to wind down and lose prominence. What ended up happening is that a guy by the name of Will Eisner took over in the late 80s. I think it was like in the late 80s, like 1989. And he rebranded the company. And what he did, and I think maybe he kind of pushed, I'm not going to say Will Eisner was the guy who caused Disney to become the way it became, but he did kind of like what Bill Clinton has been doing with the conspiracy theory. He did load and cock the trigger. Now, Will Eisner was the guy who basically rebranded and made Disney prominent again. Beauty and the Beast was a spectacular movie. Like, I almost cried, and even though I was in my 20s when I saw it. Lion King was pretty good. After about 5 or 6 of them, though, they started to all kind of look and sound the same, and they started getting stale again. But by that point, Disney had also revamped and repurposed its carnival, the Disneyland sites, like the one in Florida and the one in California. And one of the big things that you would hear back in the 90s, especially when a sports team won a championship, one of the things you would hear a lot of when the team won is that I'm going to Disneyland after they won, right? That literally became a talking point. I'm going to Disneyland. Among the things that started happening, though, and this is the dark history, this is where it started getting dark in the 90s. And I know this because one of the places that Disneyland sued is we have a mall here in Edmonton called West Edmonton Mall. It is still the largest mall in the world. It's larger than the Mall in America, which is saying something because I understand the Mall of America is just massive. West Edmonton Mall is bigger than the Mall of America. The they sued West Edmonton Mall because their playland, and if you ever go to West Edmonton Mall, they got an indoor swimming pool, they got an indoor roller coaster, they got an indoor playground that's actually significantly huge. Like that's how big West Edmonton Mall is. Like there's an actual indoor pool with a full scale, I think it's a full scale pirate ship that you walk by in the mall, and I've actually been on that ship, and I go walk by it. It's like, yeah, it's the mall is huge, like it is massive. And they sued West Edmonton Mall, and West Edmonton Mall was in a financial position to fight them, but they just said no, we're just going to change the name. But I mean, what was going on was Disneyland started going legally after anybody who used any name related to Disney, and even if it was indirectly had some sort of indirect reference to Disney, they tried to sue them. So it loaded and cocked the trigger for Disney. They also literally, and I mean, they did this like figuratively and literally. They had a legal department whose job it was to go through and find any film or media content that used any type of Disney product. So if you tried to use Mickey Mouse directly, you were going to get sued, or you were at least going to get a warning letter to remove the content. Like that's the direction. So that was the dark direction that Disney was headed in. Now, the stuff that I found out later on. Now, apparently, no, not apparently, for real, Whitney Webb revealed this. But even in that period of time, right? When you see some of these animated features that were done in the 90s, you saw the hidden sexualized content in those. I mean, when I first saw it, it was like, okay, no, that's just a coincidence. But I mean, having seen some of the stuff that I see now, I can see that it was fairly obvious. Starting in the early 2000s, there was a connection between Epstein and the Disney Corporation that continued for quite a while. That is also when Disney really started to go downhill. Now, I really started seriously pursuing a career in the film industry around 2000. Well, I mean, I went to Vancouver Film School in 2003, and I graduated in 2004. When I was at Vancouver Film School, I was warned repeatedly about how bad Disney was. When I moved to Edmonton, there are some former Hollywood employees that did work up in Edmonton, and one of them, who was a friend of mine, who no longer isn't, and he's dead, and he's not missed, but he was working in Hollywood. He worked in Hollywood for a long, long time, and the word he was telling me about the reputation that the Disney studios had in the Disney studio in Burbank, the nickname that they had for that studio was Mauschwitz, which tells me that it was a very and even the actual theme park itself, the Disney theme park and the one in Florida, in particular, apparently the one in Europe was really bad. The rules and regulations around Disney employees and the Disney brand, and et cetera, was really toxic. Like working for Disney, it was a toxic environment, made even worse by the fact that I can't remember the name of the Disney executive, but there was one prominent Disney executive that got caught up in a online child pedo sting at one point, the first of many. However, Disney continued to come out with decent movies, and the theme parks, although they were oppressive, although the studio was also not necessarily the best place to work, Disney continued to come out with relatively decent work. And they got into the early 2010s, and here's what happens in a toxic work environment. Even if you are a top of the line, staggeringly brilliant creative, if you are working and you're given carte blanche to do whatever you want, which is apparently what Disney did allow a couple directors to do, you know, you or the people that you're going to work around are going to notice that a lot of the so-called nice and friendly people that you worked with a couple of years ago, okay, yeah, all right, weren't there any longer. And also this is the point in time, the early when they first started all of this DEI stuff, there was already a politically correct atmosphere and a toxic work environment at Disney. And, like, you can only take so much. Like, you can only deal with so much, and then you just go and leave and go work somewhere else. And of course, you start letting everybody else know after you leave what a shitty environment Disney is to work at. So a lot of their best creatives and best talent were leaving, and they were being replaced by people who were desperate for work, or were hacks, or were hacktivists, which is like brain dead activists, or wokesters. And that process continued all the way through into the 2010s. Now, starting probably about 2016 is, at this point, Will Eisner has been removed, and I'm trying to remember who the name of the CEO was before Bob Iger. But Bob Iger came in, and then somebody else took over after Bob Iger. And I'm actually replace his. Bob Iger replaces Bob Chapek. Iger stepped down. Bob Chapek took over, and under Bob Chapek, that's when woke really started taking off. This is also the same point in time where the internet started. 2016 was also the point in time where the internet really started to take off. And you were, how's it going, V?
Sorry about that. My legal stuff took a little too long for me to take care of, but
okay. Well, you're welcome aboard. I'll just finish off, and then I'll let Roger Hanson go, because we're covering Disney right now. So the whole situation was that it started getting, and it's like, this is the point in time when you started seeing Disney, instead of coming up with original content, started doing live action remakes. This is the point in time when you saw Disney starting to buy up by Lucasfilm, by Pixar, by the MCU, right? Most of this was by ESPN, and I think they bought ABC and Fox as well. I find that very ironic that, Disney owns Fox, right? That one just kind of left me scratching my head, but they actually own Fox. I don't know if they still own Fox or not, but they bought Fox News. The whole thing. So Bob Chapek decided to almost immediately sign on with Fink's agenda and BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street's agenda. And they just started getting woker and woker and woker and woker. And it wasn't, like I said, around 2019, it wasn't too bad. During COVID, when everything kind of shut down for a couple of years, we had the luxury of not being subjected to crappy movies or crappy movies from Disney for a while. When they came back, the first thing they did is that they pissed off the actors union by trying to replace actual live actors with basically screen captured versions of them, and Disney was the one that, well, they were the first ones to do it. And the movies went from being sort of woke to being, when you see a Disney movie, it is a political and cultural statement in the name of globalism, DEI, and cultural Marxism kind of movies. And it just got worse and worse. And it was proudly led by Lucasfilm, but I mean, Pixar and MCU also followed suit. ESPN did during 2020 did so much woke stuff that, I mean, they did stuff that had absolutely nothing to do with sport. And of course, Fox, although Fox didn't appear to toe the line on this, Fox intentionally ignored stories, in particular when it involved Disney. The other part about Disney was the fact that, hell, I lost my whole train of thought here. The whole was the fact that it was like, well, they were just, it was the whole, oh yeah, it was the whole thing around Epstein came to light. And it was also the consistent and regular stuff of Disney employees by the handful every single year being netted up in pedo stings. It's happened literally. I don't know if that, I'm not sure if it's happened this year or not, but it's like literally every year between 2018 and 2023, there was a handful of Disney employees that got caught. And it has happened often enough that they got that it's sort of like, okay, this is not a coincidence. Then we get into some of the recent stuff. Things really started going bad when they decided to take a stance on a bill passed that Ron DeSantis brought up to in Florida. And apparently none of the Disney executives there were smart enough to actually go and read the bill to understand what it actually said. So they made all of these statements, and of course, I think there were two nails that actually sealed it for them. One was that Zoom call where you had that one executive who somehow miraculously had two transgender children. I mean, having one is phenomenally rare, but having both of them that way indicated that this was a woman who was clearly not mentally well. And she was in a position of immense responsibility at Disney. And in the process of doing this, Ron DeSantis took away some of Disney's special privileges that they had in Florida. And Disney managed to alienate they managed to alienate at least half the country. So up to this point, Disney had been doing okay because they still had their theme parks going, right? After they did this, the revenue from the theme parks started to dry up, and their stuff started getting woker and woker and woker and woker. And I'm not going to go through all the details because I don't want to cover all the ground here, but let's just talk about some of the stuff that's happened recently. Bob Iger, barely surviving a stockholders' revolt, going up. Oh, Bob, by the way, during this whole thing, Iger replaced Chapek as CEO. Bob Iger literally going up and saying, we're done with woke. We get what you're talking about. We won't do it anymore. And like literally the same day, the MCU goes out and announces that Silver Surfer is going to be female. I'm kind of wondering now, that's going to be the litmus test. Does that change? Because, I mean, MCU just came out with Wolverine, with Deadpool versus Wolverine, which is actually doing quite well. Then, of course, you've got all of the stuff that was revealed recently with Project Veritas. intention race-based hiring. And I don't, I mean, you know me, I don't get into specifically naming the Jews for a lot of stuff, but I mean, having an executive at Disney saying that you ain't getting into the upper levels of management unless you're not white or Jewish. There was that. There was the open sexualization of children that they were talking about, and of course there was their attempt to make of clandestine support of transgender and LGBT youth programs all over the United States. So, what Disney has got itself into. And by the way, I've barely covered Epstein. I'm hoping Roger in V will be able to give some more stuff. We'll be able to give some more conversation on it. So what you've got with Disney is you've got a hot mess. The Deadpool v Wolverine movie is the first piece of good news they've had in a while. And even that, when you started to peel away the layers on it, involved basically almost an act of will and collusion between Ryan Reynolds and the key production staff on that movie, because apparently they were going to make Deadpool woke as fuck. And Ryan Reynolds and the core team on that movie fought with Disney to make sure that it didn't happen. Now, there's also a rumor going around that both Marvel and the new movie that came out with Pixar is also not particularly woke either. Now, the rumor is that Disney is taking the revenue from these two movies and they're going to use it to promote a whole bunch of other woke stuff. So we'll see. But yeah, that is my part on what's going on with Disney. We'll get into Hollywood in a bit, but for now, that's where we're done. I'm going to turn it over to Roger so Roger can have his say. So, Roger, take it away.
All right. Now, when it comes to Disney and everything, that thing about the Operation March Sadness is what they called it, was actually truthful when it comes to Polk County sheriffs in Florida. They arrested 108 people who were involved in human trafficking and other related crimes, according to it and everything. And they also said that Disney employees and a former judge was involved in it. Now, I personally don't think that you're going to get like the whole story of it. Like, you'll hear some people say that only 3 or 4 people were actually Disney employees, and then you'll hear other people saying, just generalizing it, yeah, some of them were Disney employees and stuff. And then you'll hear the thing about the judge. So for me, like, I really don't think that we're ever going to get a full real story on it. It's just like when Naroki was talking about what Epstein, a lot of the sources that you check into that talk about Epstein, they're going to just say that the whole thing about Disney with Epstein isn't facts. You know what I mean? That there's no proof of verifying it. And I believe what that was all about was they said that the cruise liners were actually making trips to his island for people who were on the cruise lines. And you'll hear a lot of people say that, but I mean, you can't really, rely on these fact checker websites, because if you paid any attention to them, you can tell that they're really impartial or biased, basically. They're going to fact check according to what they think should be fact checked, and whatever they don't agree with, they're just going to call it a conspiracy or some shit like that, So the thing that I do find interesting about Epstein, out of all of the stuff that I've heard, and I've heard a lot when it comes to this guy, was the thing about these tabloids. A lot of people love to get on TV and watch TMZ and all of this stuff, but they really don't know what's going on with these tabloid magazines. These tabloids will literally dig up information about people, and Epstein was one of these people. They had files on top of files and files on Epstein and his sex trafficking and pedophilia ring. And what did they do? They hid it away, and they used it as a way of making money off of it. They ended up having this information way, way before anything was ever brought out about Epstein. It's amazing that frickin' these people get away with that stuff. So they had this information, and they were actually selling it to the highest bidder so that frickin' they can make a buck off of it. And that's what they do. They dig up dirt on people, and then they turn around and they hold it back so that they can make money off of it from, say, their adversaries, people that are against them. You know what I mean? They'll go and they'll sell that information to them so that they can blackmail the other person. And that's what was going on with Epstein. So the whole time that this stuff with Epstein was happening, there were people who knew about it and chose not to do it because they wanted to make a quick buck off of it. And that is something that really amazes me when it comes to that whole deal, you know. With Eisner, I don't know really, to be honest, because like from everything that I've learned about Eisner, he was one of those guys from way back when. He was born during the Depression and stuff like that, and he was one of the first people that actually came out with like comic books and everything. Like he was one of those pioneers, and a lot of the stuff that he did his comic books on was always about religion and I mean things of that nature. So I don't really know too much about if he would have been involved in all that stuff and everything. So that's something that I just never really thought of when it comes to him. So and like I said, you know, he did a lot of that. They even made freaking awards and shit like that in his name and his honor about it. He was old school when it comes to that stuff. But with Walt Disney and this whole woke thing, I think we were talking about that last night when it comes to a lot of the stuff that's been happening here lately. You know, I think that when it does come to this thing with the CEO of Walt Disney, he keeps talking about entertainment. That was supposed to be the whole purpose of Walt Disney and entertainment. But while he's doing that, he turns around and he comes out with controversial stuff that's considered woke. You know, like my Little Mermaid. I believe I mentioned that last night. You know, she's traditionally a white mermaid, but they made it a point to make her a black mermaid. You know what I mean? I mean, that's point blank freaking something that woke would do, you know. Then you start finding a lot of these Walt Disney movies that involve lesbians kissing and, you know, in a relationship and stuff like this coming from Walt Disney. So you can see it there, and all the time, you know, freaking this CEO is getting on there and saying, this is all about entertainment. There's no agenda, you know. And it was like even with the situations that happened in Florida between Disney World and freaking the state of Florida, I mentioned that as well. That all started over freaking a law that California passed against gay people. And that was Disney World that started this whole argument between the state of Florida and Disney World. It was Disney who started it because they didn't agree with that law and they protested about it, you know. So when it comes to Disney, you can't really listen to what they're saying and what because you have to pay attention more to what they're doing, you know. So now, I hope I did mention enough when it comes to Epstein, because the thing I think people do need to focus more on when it comes to Epstein is what he was able to get away with, and the people who were covering up what he was doing for the amount of time that he was doing it, you know. I also do think that it is suspicious how he died, and that's not coming at it from any kind of conspiracy theory. That's just really strange that he ended up dying in his cell like he did. I'm pretty sure that he had a lot of people on a list that were very influential and had the ability to make sure he died under mysterious causes, or maybe even make it look suicidal, you know, something of that nature. But with that, I will pass it over to V and let him talk.
Okay. Hopefully my air conditioner isn't too loud for you guys. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, you sound good to me.
Okay. So, situation at Disney. Oh boy. Now, I think I might be turned into Lucius Leftfoot on this show. I had a very deep discussion about some Disney stuff with the Jackal a couple days ago, because I did catch up on my Disney watching, specifically the Star Wars stuff. I watched The Acolyte. I finished watching Obi-Wan. I watched the rest of Mandalorian. I can't get a clean copy of Ahsoka. I mean, these episodes, they're digitally corrupted. What I have, I just can't get them to work. But from what I have seen, what I've caught up on, I'm going to sound like a leftist, even though I'm not one. The only thing wrong, I don't even say it's wrong. The only thing I can see why people could be mad about the series is that it's not white male centric. So, something I discuss a lot with certain people is subliminal racism. Like, someone could be subconsciously racist. They can hate something, but if you want to change out the race or the sex, these people would be fans of it. And it happens the other way. I actually asked I asked someone, you know, everybody loves Rick and Morty. Everybody loves Rick and Morty. For those who've actually seen it, they love Rick and Morty. And I asked this individual, what if Rick and Morty were black? Maybe you had a couple of sex swaps. Maybe it could be, what's the female name? I guess the female can be called Ricky too. It could be the Ricky and Morticia show. Change them to black females. Would the show have been as popular? I couldn't get an honest answer out of him. Just stating he wasn't a fan of the show. He doesn't watch the show. But I would pose that question to anybody and see if they would give an honest answer. I mean, the premise of it is none of the jokes are changed. No dialogue. The personalities are the same. If you swapped out the race, and sex, would it still be watched? With my experience with people and things about life, I would say that it would not be as popular. It's only, I guess it's natural. People like to look at themselves. They want to see examples of themselves or like people. It's not necessarily racism, but it can be in some cases. So I thought the writing and people, you guys know, well, anybody who knows me knows that I'm deep into the occult. Deep into a lot of esoteric things, especially when it comes to my faith. Now, I have a mishmash faith system, but it's mostly based off of Gnosticism. Now, Disney has always been in the spotlight concerning has always been in the spotlight concerned about witchcraft. You have these the Reds, right? The conservatives, white Christian nation, and they've gotten upset and have boycotted Disney for a long time. So this whole situation really isn't something new. It's just, I mean, everybody has their preferences of what they like and what they want to watch, but there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to this sort of thing. So someone told me something. Well, yeah, the Acolyte, it's terrible. It's crap writing. It's lesbianism. It's goddess worship. And it's like, okay, well, so it's not you centric. So what? You can't. I mean, people make me. I don't want to say angry. I just get tired of people. I get really tired of people. So I don't necessarily want to my media be revolved around people. I'd rather play a video game or watch some anime or just something that doesn't have to deal with real life people. And that is sort of, the escapism. I don't know why so much realism has to be injected into these mediums. It's an escape. And it gives them a chance to tell stories that we haven't heard. Yeah. Goddess worship. So what? The Acolyte is literally the story of it's basically a Gnostic story. For those of you who are not familiar with Gnosticism, I'll explain it in 30 seconds if I can. You have the monad, right? The one above all. Infinite, shapeless. You can't wrap your mind around it. It's a concept. It's vastness, this unending, infinite. Which birthed the first deity it birthed, called an Aeon, was Barbados, a female deity. And what came from them came basically what you would call Jesus. Some would argue Sabraxis or some other name, Aeon. However, and this is the early Gnostic church, which was the first Christian church. We're talking 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, before the Catholic Church came in and decided to demonize females, because it was the Father, Mother, Son. It got turned into Father, Holy Spirit, and Son. So down the line, other Aeons were created, generation after generation after generation. Then you got to one female deity that, without the permission of everybody else or having a partner, had immaculate birth. She gave birth to the god of this world, which is, he's an evil god, basically interchangeable with Lucifer. So when you the twins in the show, good and evil, right? Immaculate birth from the mother. They're just telling stories of ancient times, stories that, again, the Jedi was not Luke's idea. That's not his creation. Jedis are historical mystics. Okay? Historical. They have their own magical practices. They were wizards. So Disney likes these IPs that have these sort of stories that they can play around with. When you watch this stuff, you got to check everything that you know at the door so that you can appreciate the medium, what's being presented to you. If it doesn't sit with your beliefs, well, I mean, hey, that's fine too. You don't have to watch it. People don't have to watch this stuff. So getting mad at these executives and these producers and them getting the axe and all that stuff, you know, it seems to be, from my point of view, it's a little overblown, blown out of proportion. Now that I've been able to get the inside look on all this stuff, this is basically how I feel about it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with not having a white male being the main star of a series. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. For those people that complain about that, they should probably take a deep look at themselves in the mirror. You know, all the stuff, it's so ancient. The thought, the schools of thought, the whole tranny stuff, transgender stuff. I mean, ancient mystics worshipped those who were androgynous, hermaphrodites. People just didn't look like their gender. They were generally put up on a pedestal because they were thought to have the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and therefore were closer to God. So they're feeding us this stuff, trying to social engineer us into the actual teachings, because today's Christianity is a bastardized version of itself. These white Christian nationalists, I'm throwing up air quotes, you know, they don't know anything about their own religion. They've been brainwashed into so far conservativeness that any new idea is so threatening and must be, you know, eliminated. Final solution. You know, it's a big world out here, and not everybody's right, not everybody's wrong. We need to be tolerant of what's being done and actually take a look at what's being said, because nothing's ever presented in the nature in which it should. Everything is read in between the lines. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand back over to Naroki.
Yeah, I agree with Roger. Black version of Rick and Morty is the Boondocks. Boondocks was funny as fuck, by the way. I listened to it. By the way, would you be? I gotta be a little bit harsh here. Would you be okay with Ryan Gosling playing Black Panther? V? Would Black Panther have done as well if Ryan Gosling was playing Thing? How about Malcolm X? Would you like Ryan Reynolds playing Malcolm X?
If the story in fiction is written well enough, why not? We have a Black Spider-Man now.
Yeah, but there was always for instance, yeah. So But that was a multiverse. There was an explanation for that. They didn't just race swap a character. I mean, yeah, okay, it can be done. For instance, what's his name?
There used to be a black Captain America.
The guy who played
Mel. There was actually originally Captain America, Marvel. Captain Marvel was actually male, and he was changed to a female.
Oh well, there was a black Captain Marvel at one point. Actually, she was a pretty kick-ass character too. Again, though, there was a backstory for that. As for Ahsoka, good God, where do I even get started? It wasn't just because she was black. That's the propaganda. Shitty writing, like shitty, god awful writing. Making deliberate lore, and again, this is the same sort of thing, right? With what happened with the Warhammer 40K, where it's like you start tampering with the lore and like the whole, like, I mean, for instance, I think we can agree that you cannot make a decent PG-13 version of Warhammer 40K, right? Like, you just can't do it. And not have it be true to the actual character of Warhammer 40K. Bad writing deliberately and going so far as to do the same sort of thing that happened with Warhammer 40K, where the guy who the person who runs Wikipedia actually changed the entry in Wikipedia to make it appear as though certain established characters in the Star Wars universe were older than they actually were. The fact that
you can't make Warhammer 40K go woke because it's based on racism. Literally.
Yeah, it's humans. It's human racism towards non-humans. Yeah,
right.
But I mean, it's again, though, I mean, it's like, the fact that they're, and by the way, like, I mean, you can talk race all you want. Let's talk about the open misandry that was in Ahsoka, right? Like that.
See, now you're just taking me out the argument, because that's the series I couldn't watch. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh no. If you've been around in the Manosphere enough, it's sort of like, yeah, it's obvious in that movie. No, it's the bad writing, the bad characters, and I mean, the lady who played Ahsoka is just a bad actress. Period. She had no acting range. There were a lot of there was a lot of actors when I looked at that, from the little I saw of that show, where there's a couple of actors that were just like bad, and there were some that were good that you could tell they were just mailing their performances in. There was one particular scene which I'll bring up, which is an example of female sexism towards males, and that was that scene where that one villain comes out of the water and he's basically like from the waist up, he's like naked, and it's like they didn't have. It's not just because the main character was black. Although I will point out, let's not even begin to get into the fact that the showrunner for that movie was Harvey Weinstein's personal assistant.
Okay, but that aside, I mean, as men, I think we're strong enough to take some ribbing every now and again.
Well, if it was just one show, that would be fine. But I mean, again, I know I'd like
to clear something up too. When it comes to the Black Panther, I'm a white dude, and I would have been pissed if he was a white dude. Just to make that clear.
It would have been disrespectful to the lore. Exactly.
It's the Black Panther. You know what I'm saying? You don't take the Black Panther and make him a white dude. I mean, Black Panther is black. He's, you know what I mean? And I think that's what people are getting at. It's not a race thing. It's just, why can't you make a cartoon that is not about Little Mermaid and make it a black character? Just do something new instead of trying to make a
Race
state.
swap, yeah, and that's something else we'll get into later. Well, actually, we might just get into that right now. Another thing that I noticed, and specifically around the Olympics, and I don't know whether they were doing this on the American channels, but on the Canadian channel, CBC, which is just absolute and utter garbage. Like CBC is the CNN up here. If you watch the commercials on CBC, you would think that white you would and I'm gonna paraphrase this by saying this. Pointing this out does not equate to racism. But if you would watch the commercials done on CBC during the Olympics, you would think that white boys anywhere actually have there was like literally no commercial about a white boy aspiring to be an Olympian. Like you would think that that just never happened at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that actually is in anything. But to Roger, to what Roger just said, why don't they just do something new? Why did well they did the Alkalite.
Oh, that was horrible.
That was
horrible.
They could have. There's so much more they could have done with that, and they could have done a whole lot more with Ahsoka too. They had opportunities.
They could have done a lot more with the prequels. Christian Henderson's son, whatever his name is, I think was the worst choice for Anakin. The worst.
Yeah.
But nobody complains about that.
No, there was talk about it at the time. Trust me.
Yeah, and then they switched out. They switched out the original Anakin that was on the last. What was it? Episode 3. They switched him out with him on the movie because they had the younger.
He's
Anakin.
a terrible actor.
Yeah.
Terrible. And they made Anakin be a whiny little baby. The most powerful Jedi ever. As a little whiny little baby.
Well, you recall Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker is pretty whiny too. Like there was an actual whine counter on the original Star Wars. How many times Mark Hamill's character whined? So maybe that was actually an intentional casting choice. But yeah, getting back to Disney. Yeah, I mean, all of this talk about race swapping, and I mean we barely even touched the Epstein connection and all the pedophiles that got in, and the fact, and going back to that situation in Florida, like there was so much push against that I mean it's sort of like you and I actually made a video about it at the time, right? That there was so much groundswell against that thing going on in Florida that there were probably pedophiles that were actually involved in that push. And it's sort of like, again, right? And then, of course, you go back to the stuff in the 90s and you can see the sexualized content even then. So, I mean, yeah, Disney, I think what's going on is that Disney is going to be the studio that's going to end up having to tank for the rest of Hollywood too, because I mean you are clearly seeing signs where Hollywood is waking up. Again, I don't know all of the I think I say I'm not super familiar with stuff in Africa. I do know that there are stories inside Africa that can be probably made into good content. Disney, great. Maybe Disney should go over to Pretoria or Cape Town, because Cape Town's got a very, I think it's either Cape Town or Johannesburg has got a very thriving film industry there. Set up a studio in Africa, hire a bunch of African people, and start going back. There's all sorts of like the African vampire, the African version of the vampire is very, very fucking scary. Like you can't.
You know what? I've actually suggested this several times, but I can tell you why they're not going to do that. There's some
the
stories that are very scary to white people.
Well,
Do you know the story of Yaku?
the only way you can kill an African vampire is that you have to find out where, because you can't physically kill. You mean you can burn it to a crisp, but it will just regenerate after a day. The only way you can kill an African vampire is that an African vampire puts on it during the night. It becomes a vampire, but during the day it has a skin that it puts on, almost like a skinwalker. It walks around like a normal human being. The
Okay.
only way you could
Do you
kill
know
it.
the story of Yakub? Yakub,
I've heard the name. I
baker,
don't know the story.
baker and creator of the devil, swine merchant. Okay, so I'll give this to you in 30 seconds. Not take up too much time. The oldest story ever told. This predates Gilgamesh by several thousands of years. Okay? History will lie to you and say Gilgamesh is the oldest story. It's not. The story of Yakub. Okay? Apparently, this is the oldest African story in history. So apparently there are these alien races. They were black. They had these, scientists and all this stuff. They lived inside the earth. Okay. There was a disgruntled one of these black aliens was disgruntled because he was forced to live on the surface because he was exiled because his mother, who was a white alien, was screwing around on the king, right? So they had this. The child came out black, anyways. So he was forced to live on the surface and go to school and be like everybody else. He was made fun of by the other black surface dwelling people because his head was so huge. Okay, these aliens were double brained. Okay, so he decided he hated black people. So what he was the first eugenicist, basically. He took thousands of people and moved them to, I believe, like Sicily or something, some northern piece of land, and he only bred the light-skinned people until, he would kill off anybody who was dark, and he would only breed the light-skinned people until they became more and more light-skinned. Hate was bred into them for any other race. They were exiled even further to the Caucasian mountains. I'm sorry,
The Caucasus, yeah.
So this is the oldest story known to mankind. White people don't want our mythologies. That's not going to happen.
Well, the geological history is that at one point the Mediterranean was completely dammed off, and during that period, because there weren't that many humans around at that point, because apparently the Neanderthals had pretty much, or there was another race. Because I actually have it up at all my alt channels, and it is available on YouTube. At one point, there was basically only about 25 or 30 breeding pairs of humans left. Now, they have no idea how it was that they survived, but apparently, yeah, they were almost killed off. And also, there's a theory going around that the place that they survived at was kind of like a sheltered bay, because all humans, regardless of where they are, every other hominid on the planet is covered with hair. Humans are the only hominid species, as say, great apes, gorillas, etc., that is comfortable swimming in water. And they were apparently around. We were in this bay long enough that we lost most of our hair, which is exactly what happens with species that live near water for an extended period of time. That's also very interesting, but that's not actually what we're actually talking about here. But let's get into the next part of this whole Hollywood, because Disney, like I said, I kind of figured we were going to go on for a while about Disney, because Disney is just a mess, a hot, steaming, fetid mess. Now, the other part that is going on about Hollywood, and this is something, is the occultism and the rampant pedophilia and the wokeness and all of that stuff. Well, my understanding, and this is based upon stuff that I've heard from talking to people who still actually work in Hollywood, is that there's a few factions, and one of the factions is actually Luciferians. But you also have Scientology, you have gays, you have the Jews, you also have, oddly enough, the 12 steppers. And at some point in your progress in Hollywood, you have to sign, like, you can't really sign on with the Jews unless you're Jewish, right? But you have to throw in your lot with one of those groups. And if you're going to advance, and each one of them has a specialty in what they do and what they don't do. There has been discussed, like, for instance, I remember even from the early days of YouTube, there are these people that would post up, and we're gonna get into Brian Peck at an open secret here. There was this individual who poked. God damn it! I lost my whole train of thought. It'll probably come back to me here at some point. The whole, what was I just, sorry, wouldn't you remember me what I was talking about just a couple minutes ago? Any of you?
Yeah, you were getting into Hollywood, and you were starting to discuss just basically, well, you were getting ready to say what you were going to start out with. You just never.
Pedophilia,
pedophilia,
pedophilia, and all the other toxic elements in Hollywood. But yeah, we'll get. Oh yes, that's right. That's what it's going to talk about.
There you go.
All right. So, over the years, for instance, there was a leak. I have never found it again, but apparently somebody recorded Angelina Jolie talking offset on one of her movies about some of the occult shit that she ran into. Brad Pitt has mentioned it. There's that movie Eyes Wide Shut, which strangely enough, I find it rather peculiar that I've never seen that movie, but I have never seen that movie. And apparently there's a whole bunch of hidden messages in the background of that movie. Now, and of course, yes, that's right. There were people very early on, even on YouTube, that were posting up these videos, and they were taking these obscure photos and saying, "See, this person is a Satanist because he just." Because one of the photos that tends to come up is it's a photo of a celebrity covering their eye, and it's sort of like, yeah, that's just a photo of them covering up their eye. It does not, just because an actor does that one time, that does not signify anything. Right, like, unless you have the context behind why they're doing it, that doesn't signify anything. Like, somebody actually tried to say that because there's a photo of one time of Joe Rogan basically making a triangle symbol with his hands, and I saw that, and it's like, okay, well, what's the context behind that? Right, like, just a photo of him doing that is not enough. And when I first heard these people talking about it, it's like, yeah, dude, life, go get one. It really wasn't until, like, for instance, there was a photo that I saw on Facebook yesterday. If you go look at the symbol, and we're going to go, strangely enough, we're going to go back to Disney for this one, Mona. The O, I think it's either the O or the A in Mona has that kind of like swirl symbol that you see that's typically associated with pedophile movements in it. It's a very interesting photo. I'm going to have to try and find that and post it up for you. Because it was posted up at Facebook like yesterday in my feed. the whole issue. Ah, here it is. Yeah. Here, I'm going to forward this. First, I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to forward it here. I'll show you. They'll show you what I mean. In this photo, what you see is that the O has a particular look to it. But again, right, like when I first started seeing this, it's like, oh, okay, you know what? Again, go get a life, guys. Like seriously, like go get a life. But and it's sort of like, and then of course you started. Then of course you saw this the stuff with see, there's the O, right? Um, and then of course you take a look at what happened with Pizzagate and all of the strange symbology, including the that triangle symbol with that same swirl in it, appears quite frequently in regards to Pizzagate, and of course the stuff with $50,000 worth of pizza and et cetera, all of that sort of thing. Then you get into what happened with the Trudeau Foundation. Same thing. Then, of course, and then, of course, there was also what happened with Wayfair. And then, of course, you got what really did it for me was the way there were just so many long-reaching coincidences that were involved in that Balenciaga situation now that when you take a look at what is going on, even perhaps, say, with the Olympics right now. All right. Now, there was something that went on in the opening ceremonies, and people that what's going on is the IOC has intentionally tried to copyright one particular image of the opening ceremonies, and that's that's the image with basically the guy covered in blue singing. And what people don't see in that photo, if you look off to the left, there's a guy with his dick hanging out. And I've seen both the photograph of it, and I've also seen the way the camera angle is used in that particular scene. So the camera just kind of pans to the left really, really slowly. So unless you're specifically looking for it, you won't necessarily see it, right? And that's exactly what happened with Balenciaga. It's the stuff in the background, which is, again, going back to Disney. That was that all of that hidden sexualized imagery that Disney has been accused of doing, right? So you've got this long outstanding with one company in particular, but then you get into, say, and now we're going to get into an open secret, which I think is both me and Roger have both seen. I don't know whether V has seen it or not, but I had a very weird encounter just before I left Banff in the 90s. And Banff is a resort town. It's an international resort town. We get people from all over the world. We get people from California, whatever. And I was sitting in this one bar, and this one dude, and it was a dude, started talking to me, and I told him about my interest in film, and he was being really creepy and really handsy and all that sort of shit. And at one point, he mentions to me that he is involved with this company down in California, and that they were going he told me this, and it's turning out to be true, that there's going to come the point in time where the internet is going to supplant television as the medium of choice, which is exactly what's going on, right? Now, he was still creepy as fuck, but he gave me this card, and I didn't take a very good look at it, but I mean, I didn't put it together until years later when I saw an open secret, and this guy worked for a company called Digital Entertainment Network, which Roger Hansen knows about. Now, Roger Hansen, when I saw that and I saw what was going on at Digital Entertainment Network. And before we even get into, well, yeah, the head of Digital Entertainment Network got caught, and he fled to England, and he's just disappeared. Like, he's never faced consequences for his actions. The Digital Entertainment Network had to fold up shop because of the accusations. I think it was less than 2 years before Netflix came into being. So Dan almost became Netflix, almost became what Netflix was. Now, here's the really weird part about Netflix. Now, you remember a few years ago, when actually it was just a couple years ago when Netflix was coming out with this almost semi soft core child porn stuff like Cuties. I said this at the time on the Red Pill Nation Hangout show. I'm wondering how many of the executives that didn't face any consequences, because apparently there were like some really wild parties that company would put on. Sexual assault happened at these parties towards men, towards boys, underage boys, by the way, I should point out. How many of the people who worked at Den who were involved in that stuff went over and worked at Netflix because it was the next thing that came up? And you go about 10 years later, and now all of these people who are just ground level employees are now executives making these decisions. Suddenly, the decisions that Netflix made around, say, a movie like Cuties doesn't seem to be that much of a stretch. And then, of course, you've also got Quiet on Set, and both An Open Secret and Quiet on Set talked about this guy, Brian Peck, predator of the worst type. And I mean predator of the worst type is because he was smart enough and obviously connected enough, and probably with the approval of some of his friends around him, was able to stay away from criminal prosecution for quite a while because of his connections. And even after he got sent to jail, there was still plenty of support for him. When he got out of jail, and you guys may want to be sitting down for this one, guess which company hired him when he got out of prison? Anybody?
I don't know. Walt Disney?
Disney. Exactly. What was going on at Nickelodeon? And again, of course, why are they finding so many pedophiles and creeps at places like Nickelodeon and Disney and whatever? It's because that's where the kids are. Why are so many pedophiles teachers? Why are so many school bus drivers, etc., being exposed as pedophiles? Because that's where the kids are, right? The bottom line is that, the whole situation, a lot of Quiet on Set. A lot of people think that was about Dan Schneider, but a lot of it was about Brian Peck. Dan Schneider, just like, either he didn't know or people were too scared to tell him, because it was very clear that people around Dan Schneider knew and didn't want to tell him. And it was like the general tone that has occurred with Dan Schneider around Quiet on Set is that Dan Schneider ran Nickelodeon in that department like with an iron fist, and you didn't want to piss him off. So a lot of people, and they were scared of him. And also there was some other stuff going on, like hiring two writers and paying them from the same wage pool. There was also some other stuff there. But there was just this whole, again, right? There were at least 3 pedophiles that worked at Nickelodeon when Dan Schneider was there. Apparently, Dan Schneider never put any safeguards in to prevent this stuff from happening. The fact that Brian Peck was rehired by Disney, of all companies, when he got out of prison says a lot about Disney again. And there's just that, and just a kind of a very curious little coincidence before I turn it over to Roger Hansen here. There was also that video that got released, which, because, and this is something that I got to point out here about the symbol of Nickelodeon. Dan Schneider had a foot fetish. The original symbol for Nickelodeon was a foot. The symbol that came up after the foot was removed was of a big splat. Now, somebody put two and two together and looked at Epstein Island and looked at the splat and noticed that they were very similar in shape. Now, again, right, if you look at that in isolation, you would just say, oh, well, that's just a coincidence. But unfortunately, right, everything else that happened with Balenciaga and the Trudeau Foundation and what happened with Mayfair was also supposed to just be a bizarre coincidence too. You know, at what point do so many interlocking coincidences stop being coincidences? And one last thing before I turn it over to Roger. There was also that strange little habit of splatting women in the face, not with semen, obviously, but with liquids. And you know, having seen more than my fair share of porn over the years, right? That is a sexually loaded image. Just like, you know, like the climax scene of a porno where the guy basically shoots his load into a chick's face. All right, now I'm done. I'm going to turn it over to Roger.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to mention was mostly when it comes to this Open Secret documentary that was put out. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that was, well, for one thing, you'll hear a lot of people, especially after Hillary Clinton was running for president, how they would always talk about Pizzagate this, Pizzagate that. And for me, it kind of pissed me off because, you know, there was a lot of things that took place in this on this subject, but for some reason everybody wanted to follow that, which was all exciting to them and everything, and involved politics. You know, but there was real things that had happened in Hollywood that nobody freaking even knew about, didn't even care about. You know, but let's run our mouth about Pizzagate. And, I think the thing about Pizzagate that really turned me off the most when I found out that most of these people were using it as Reddit as a way of pretending like it was information that was released by Assange, when the truth of the matter was it wasn't. It was just made up fictitious shit. You know what I mean? The most I ever seen from Pizzagate that they showed was like some dark, secluded freaking restaurant where a woman was sitting up on a stage talking mysterious language that you could never understand, or they had video footage of some kind of monuments that showed little symbols and shit, and they said, oh, this is where rituals are taking place, but there was never any hardcore evidence, substantial evidence. But then you take a look at other situations that actually did have evidence and nobody even cared about it, you know. Like Corey Haim was the one that really got me started when they came out with, or Corey Feldman is the one who really brought it to attention after Corey Haim's death. And he said that he was molested by people in Hollywood, and that caused him to where he fell into deep depression and eventually took his own life. Well, everybody turned around and tried to debunk that and said that, oh, no, that's not what happened, because their parents said that it didn't happen. And for me, I know that Corey Haim had issues with his parents before he passed away. So why would you take his parents' words as true? You know what I mean? I mean, when he was alive, he didn't get along with his parents. But since they said that, it wasn't true. He didn't kill himself. It wasn't that, And the thing that really stuck out to me about Corey Haim was the fact that he actually accused Charlie Sheen of sexually molesting him. And Charlie Sheen, as we all know, has been going through a lot of controversy, or had been going through a lot of controversy on his show, 2.5 Men, where he had to leave it and eventually go through a lot of stuff concerning his behaviors and stuff. I believe his wife, actually, even Denise Richards, actually left him, and it was all over that stuff. So there was a lot of stuff.
I hate to interrupt.
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt, but I have an emergency. I got to go.
All right.
Thanks, and I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks, everybody.
You too, man. But the thing about it too was, even his wife, Denise Richardson, said that they were having issues and stuff, and that was one of the reasons why they ended up getting into a divorce. So it kind of makes you wonder what was actually taking place. And I think there was even accusations of him spreading HIV to some of the people that he was having relations with. So that was one of the things that caught my attention. But then when I did actually watch Open Secret, and I found out a lot of stuff that was going on there. Well, before I get into this, I also want to mention Joy Behar. Now, whenever Feldman went on The View and started talking about Corey Haim, she seemed to be really, really defensive about that. And for me, I find that kind of suspicious. Why would she be so freaking against it, what he was saying? Like, she was real defensive and stuff like that. So that kind of made some red flags to me too. So I think there is a lot of things going on in Hollywood that people really don't want to discuss. And my question would be, what would Joy Behar, or however she says her name, what relationship would she have to the Sheen family that would cause her to react in such a way? Because that just seemed odd whenever I did see that. So, but moving on to what Naroki was talking about was this Open Secret documentary. Now, not just the evidence that they bring up in the movie is so much interesting. It's actually what was involved whenever they turn around and they made this documentary. Now, in order for them to get a PG rating for this documentary coming out, they were actually censored, and they had to drop a few things. So, and even after doing that, nobody wanted to pick up this documentary. It seemed to be something that nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. And to acquire the PG-13 rating, they only had to change 2 instances in the movie where the word blowjob was mentioned. Okay, and this was how much frustration that they had when it came to getting this video put out. People were fighting them all the way, and eventually it got to the point where nobody even wanted to do it. And they've been putting this video out on the internet since freaking I think it was 2011, I believe it was. Even after that, maybe a little bit, but they've been putting it out and allowing people to watch to watch this entire documentary for free, and nobody knows about it. It's like it's something that has been passed on to from person to person and everything. And I believe that the guy who actually made the movie before, or this movie right here was also another. He also did another documentary that was before that, before Open Secret, and this one was called Deliver Us from Evil. And it had to do with Birds is the name of the guy who came up with this movie, and uh, he came out with a movie. I believe it was about the child sex abuse in the Catholic Church, and then later on he turned around and he came out with this one. He ended up actually getting an Academy Award for the one about the Catholic Church, but for some reason he couldn't get any kind of support or anything from this video. And Naroki actually said something in comments that I think he should probably talk about. He said, "Just remember the sounds of freedom." So I'm going to stop right here and let you talk on that one, Naroki, because that sounds like something you'd want to say.
Yes, I was talking about Netflix and its somewhat tenuous connection to digital entertainment network. Netflix refused to put Sound of Freedom on. The other ones did, but Netflix refused to put Sound of Freedom up on its platform. The attacks on Sound of Freedom were so off base and so unhinged and uncensored, and it's like what happened with Sound of Freedom is they would just say stuff about it, and again, right, because the media publications no longer allow comments on their on their platform, on their channels when they post it up online. You can't debunk it there. You have to go over to Twitter or you have to go over to Instagram or whatever to debunk it. And literally, they would say stuff about Sound of Freedom that was just an absolute blatant lie, and they attacked the original creator of it and so on and so forth. And again, keep in mind, I can't remember what the name of the studio was that came out with this, like the movie they came out with afterwards. And I mean, they're not going to hit everything out of the park, obviously, but the next one they came out with was a little bit kind of like, it was a little bit too Bible thumpish for me, although it was a fairly decent sci-fi flick. The whole thing about this, and this also happened with the movie that Father Stu. I can't remember the name of the actor who was the lead guy, who was Mark Wahlberg. Yeah, Mark Wahlberg for Father Stu. They also attacked that one a lot. And it actually, I mean, it wasn't it wasn't like an outstanding movie, but it was, I mean, it was an okay movie, and it featured a redemption arc for a person who wasn't a particularly good human being. And he found his peace and he found his redemption through religion. Now, that's not how I got there myself, but I mean, whatever floats a person's boat, right? And the whole situation with Sound of Freedom is just like almost like the same way that Ron DeSantis's don't quote unquote don't say gay bill got attacked. That's the same way Sound of Freedom got attacked. They even tried to peg the character upon which Sound of Freedom was based on. They tried to frame him up at one point. This came from Vice, by the way, which is why it didn't go anywhere, because Vice is just like completely shot all their credibility to hell, all to hell. They tried to frame him up as a sexual harasser. Like there was so in fact they attacked it so now that I'm remembering, there was that one individual who launched that attack, launched that scathing hit piece on Sound of Freedom, who about 2 or 3 months later got caught in a child pedo ring. I can't remember what the name of that guy was. We did cover it on Red Pill Nation when it happened. There's, again, going back to the fundamental basis, because I know, because I wanted to go there at one time myself and I got over it, right? A lot, and I'm going to get actually a little bit confessional here. I mean, my background when I was growing up, I was always fascinated with making movies, and I wanted to be a filmmaker and actor when I was a kid, right? But when I left my hometown under a cloud, and yeah, okay, you can do worse than Prince George growing up as a kid, right? You could do a whole lot worse, but I mean, it was not, my whole childhood was unpleasant, right? I was a bit of a joke in the town, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, you know, part of me wanting to make something of myself in the film industry was just to show these assholes how wrong they were going to be about me. So I mean, you get I had to come to terms with that, especially when I started finding out how woke Hollywood was, and I realized that it's sort of like, yeah, do I really want to be seeking the approval of this type of a person in my life? And it's like, no, I don't, right? A lot of people in Hollywood, like when they first come to Hollywood, they come from, Hollywood sells the dream, right? It sells California itself is a representation of the American dream. Somebody can come from very humble backgrounds, and it does happen, right? It happens enough that, that it works internationally. You don't see people, for instance, trying to build 50-foot ladders to cross the border to get illegally into Russia or Turkey or Iran. You don't see people desperately rushing to get, or India. You don't see people desperately rushing to get into those countries. The whole It's the dream. You can go to California, if you're pretty, if you're talented, right? You can go to California and you can make a name for yourself, and you can actually rise up through the ranks. You know, Brad Pitt comes from Springfield, Missouri, small town in the Midwest. He came from humble backgrounds. Ricky Gervais, there's a lot of them that come from, yeah, there are actors in there that like are generational or come from originally, but I mean, Hollywood represented a legit possibility for somebody that came from humble backgrounds to go and make a name for themselves. And a lot of people did, right? The issue was, and this is, we're going to go back to Weinstein again here, is that you have the casting couch and you have predators like Weinstein, and you also have predators like, say, Den, who will take advantage of that desire that people have to want to be famous. And there's so many people coming into Hollywood. Its star has dimmed a lot in the last few years, but there's still a lot of people going to Hollywood because they want to make a name for themselves, right? And there's no shortage. I mean, even in the town, even in the city that I live in, there's no shortage of predators. There's no shortage of perverts. There's no shortage of degenerates, right? And, you know, what I think Sound of Freedom did, even though Hollywood wasn't specifically named in it, but there was a scene, and you've seen Sound of Freedom, right, Roger?
No, I never did get to watch the movie, but I've actually heard about it. I just never got
Okay, yeah,
around to watching.
you're gonna have to watch it. You got to keep in mind that there's a scene towards the end, well, towards the middle of Sound of Freedom, where they trap a lot of these sex traffickers on an island. You know, what wasn't so well known at the time, because this movie was made before Epstein Island had been exposed. And when it came out, people were reminded of Epstein Island. But I mean, what really didn't sit particularly well with me was how the establishment, the Hollywood establishment, did everything they could to downplay the success of this movie. Like if this movie had a budget 10 times its size, it would have crossed over. It would have crossed like $1.5 billion if it had been given a proper cinematic release. And the way they've tried to memory hole this movie after the fact, just like how they tried to memory hole An Open Secret, and just like how Hollywood has. And I mean, have you noticed that nobody is talking about Quiet on Set anymore? Nobody mentions it.
Yeah, it's nowhere. You
Yeah,
never hear about it,
you never hear about it. Same thing there, right?
right? Now, one thing too, I think when it comes to Sound of Freedom is, I think that's or that's one of many reasons why they are also attacking QAnon, because I believe QAnon was involved in that movie too, weren't they?
I haven't heard. I've heard stories about it. I've never really gotten too deep into it to check. What I have noticed is basically they outright blatantly lied about that movie. It said stuff about it that just was not true.
Well, they're doing that too with QAnon. They're even going as far as saying that it's been overran by the woke movement and all this stuff. And I mean, I haven't really been keeping up on QAnon very much, but whenever I was watching it, it really didn't have much to do with the woke movements or liberals or anything like that.
Oh no, it was straight up about human trafficking. But they threw in Q, and they threw in Trump, and they threw in everything, and just hope to God. And this is the same thing that they're doing now. I mean, they also tried to, for instance, they've tried to their best ability to memory hole what happened with Trump getting shot. They've done everything for instance, to get, but we're not here to talk about Trump. But I mean, yeah, like you'll see the establishment media do that. They try to memory hole stuff. And yeah, that's just suddenly something that I'm remembering. But I mean, it's like there's just been so, for instance, tinfoil hats. Sam Tripoli, he does his show. He is based out of Hollywood. Like he has lived in Hollywood most of his adult life. And although he's not gone into specific detail about it, he has mentioned, he's basically said, well, the stuff that you heard at Me Too, most of that happened. And here's the really frightening part about the whole thing with Me Too, is that they didn't get everybody. Apparently they never even came close to getting everybody. And what ended up happening with Me Too is that it just ended up, well, they did the same thing that BLM did, and instead of using it to help victims of sexual violence in the film industry, they just went off and started buying mansions and throwing parties and holding big lush charity events and just having a self-perpetuating cycle that way. And they got exposed of doing that a few years later. So it's like, yeah, a lot of hypocrisy going on there. But anyway, yeah, continue. Yeah, if you have anything more to say, Roger, go ahead.
Well, yeah, what you had said there too kind of goes into what happened on the the I'm having a brain part, Open Secret. When it comes to all of this stuff that was taking place with digital entertainment and everything, that there was actually an entire ring of people involved, and there was a network as well. In the documentary, there was a guy that they were always talking about, and he was like a child actor's manager, and he had a whole list of all these.
Oh, I remember those. I remember that guy. Yeah.
And he had a whole list of them, and he'd have them go down, and they would take pictures of like these male actors with their shirts off and everything, and they would make them do modeling jobs to where they could put them in a magazine. And according to what they were saying, was they were using this as advertisements to a lot of these pedophiliacs in Hollywood, where they could just browse through the pictures and pick out which kid they wanted and have them go to this party. And this was supposed to have been taking place the whole time that it was happening, as well as these parties that they were having to exploit these children. And the guy that is most interesting about it all is, like, everybody knows already about Mark Collins. Now, he was the guy who actually was the founder of DEN, or Digital Entertainment Networks, but he also had a partner named Brock Pierce. And for anybody who is involved with cryptocurrency, they know all about Brock Jeffrey Pierce. He was involved with Bitcoin quite a bit. And the story behind Mark Collins is that, okay, Mark Collins ended up getting brought up on these charges for child trafficking, sex trafficking, and all that. But he fled to Spain.
England, and then probably went to Spain.
Now, first he did go to Spain, but this was before everything. Now, what happened is Interpol ended up arresting him, and I believe it was 3 other people, and that was in 2002, and he was in Marbella. Now, he was released of any criminal charges, okay? And but when they did go in and they busted the place that he was in, they found guns, machetes, and child pornography in the house where he was found. Now, while he was there, he fought extradition proceedings for about 2 years, but then finally he returned to the United States, where he pled guilty on quite a few charges for enticing children, and he had to register as a sex offender. After he turned around and he did that, that's when he ended up going from where he was at back over to Europe, and that's where he ended up freaking giving up his citizenship here in the United States and became a citizen there. And I don't know for sure if it was in Spain or England or wherever it was. I believe it was, it was the UK. I'm pretty sure of it. It was there where he ended up going over there for a brain tumor, I believe, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And that's where he was. And after all of that had happened, he had become silent partners in MMORPG service companies and IGE. Okay, and that's where Pierce comes in, because he was the founder of MMORPG and IGE. So he's sitting off in Europe, and he's a private or a silent partner with Pierce still, and making money off of these companies. Now, IGE is in Spain, I believe, and I also believe that he's also involved in cryptocurrency with the Bitcoin. Now, I believe Pierce, at the time that I kept tracks of all this stuff. He was the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, and that's where they're still making money off of it. So they went from child exploitation into the Bitcoin industry. And if anybody knows the history on Bitcoin, they actually went in and they convinced organized crime to take their money and invest it into Bitcoin to freaking get started. So there's a whole story there all by itself. So with that, that's all I got to say on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll get into the third part, which was supposed to be the YouTube part, which is what V wanted to be involved in, but he's not here anymore. So, but we've covered how the dirt with Disney. We've covered all the pedophilia. Let's just talk in general about the wokeness in Hollywood and the corruption. Because, I mean, before all of this other stuff happened, right? I mean, there were already some very specific hazards that were occurring in Hollywood. You had the casting couch, you had screenplay theft, you had, and this is a Manister thing. You had it. It was far too easy for a woman to accuse a guy of something. And this is like all over. This is like all over the entire West. It's far too easy for a woman to accuse a guy of something and basically ruin his career. You had nepotism. You had like a lot of people seem to think that working on a film set is easy. No, you have crazy, insane hours. You have. Yeah, you basically have, if you're a performer, you run the risk of people stealing your stuff. There was a lot of hazards just normally in Hollywood because of what was going on. And then you throw in all of this woke stuff. And again, like what V was talking about, and then when I start talking to other people, I start talking about monsters, whatever, like, I mean, I did not know this. This is something that I only discovered a couple of days ago. Apparently, in northern Russia, northern Finland, there is a monster up there. I can't remember what the name of it is, but the way it behaves and the way it acts is very similar to the skinwalker that you keep hearing about in the western U.S. I found that very interesting. I also discovered that Europe, contrary to what a lot of non-whites like to think, Europe actually has remnants of its old animist nature worship, Celtic worship, that sort of thing. They have tribes of people up in the far north of Europe that still follow those ways, Laplanders, etc., etc., etc. And it's like these are similar to the Native American tribes that you would find in Australia and in Africa and in North America, and these exist in Europe as well. So the myth that Europe was not at one time exactly like the rest of the world in terms of its tribalism and that sort of thing is a bit of a myth. And to try, and this is part of the thing that happened with the MCU. This is why Ryan Reynolds went and said, no, we're not going to give Brie Larson and Tatiana Maslov a scene in the new Deadpool movie, was because it's like, I mean, you know, they're just going to go in here and they're just going to assault men for being men. And it's like, no, you're not doing that. Like, you're going to actually cost us viewership if you do that. So we're not going to. And I mean, at the point where they might not even release the scene, which is actually really pissing Brie Larson off, and Tatiana, the woman who played She-Hulk, as well, right? The overall level of, and not just the race swapping, which is also something else. And I mean, again, right? It's like there's I just brought up, yeah, there is the reason why I brought up the European examples, right? If this is stuff that exists in Europe, then there's no way that you can't tell me, for instance, that there aren't good stories out of Africa and out of South America and whatever. And they don't need to be race swapping out Western stories and changing the race of characters in Western stories and having blacks show up in Lord of the Rings, because there's plenty of stuff in those areas that they can make movies about themselves if they just develop their own industry. And again, this is what I said. I mean, Johannesburg, South Africa has got a thriving film industry, right? Like, go into parts of Africa, start finding stories and start making them, right? Like first I described earlier the story about the making of about the African vampire, right? It's a distinctly different vampire from the one that we think about in the West. Those are stories that can be done out of Johannesburg or some other place, and you can probably make some decent movies out of there, right? Instead of having to race swap characters in Western shows to feature diversity. Now, again, and of course, you've got also and this is what I was talking about with that encounter with an open secret, right? Like that dude who I suspect worked for Dan, right? The one who was getting all fucking handsy with me when I was in my late 20s in that bar in Banff.
Mm-hmm.
That guy, and this is just me speculating, that guy was doing that because he felt that it was perfectly okay to do that because the environment where I suspect he was coming from, that was just par for the course. Right? You know, if some guy turned him down or walked away, well, that's okay. There's another 10 or 15 other guys coming up, and one of them probably will. Right? Same thing with Harvey Weinstein, right? And the casting couch. Harvey Weinstein literally had no game, right? Like his approach to getting women to sleep with him was to walk out of a bathroom completely fucking naked. He didn't try to seduce them. He didn't try to get them to like him. It was sort of like he walked out of the bathroom naked and said, "Sleep with me and I'll give you an part." And here's and this is something that I'm going to have to point out to a lot of people who have gotten in this far and have listened to this. There were a lot of women that did. And here's the part about it too. And I mean, I'm sure there's a few people going, "Oh, well, those were no talent hacks," right? I wouldn't describe Ashley Judd as a no talent hack. I wouldn't describe Heather Graham as a no talent hack. Like, that's the issue, right? You've got these predators in Hollywood who are willing to do this, and you've also got women with the looks and talent and lack of principles that are willing to go there, right? So what I'm seeing here is that, and this is what you're starting to see, and this is what's eventually going to happen, even though they're trying to do everything they can to prevent it, is that you're going to eventually see, and you're beginning to see it now. You're going to, like, you've seen it in India and you've seen it in Asia, whatever, but you're going to see almost like an alt film community start up outside of California. It's not going to be centralized. Now, are they going to be as moral and ethical as Hollywood? Well, if V had stayed on board, we would have been talking about podcasters and YouTubers right now and would have found out that they weren't. That'll be for another episode down the road. But, you know, at least, you know, the thing that is starting to occur now is that if you've got the equipment, if you've got access to the crew and you've got access to the talent and you work hard enough and you're willing to put the effort in, you know, you don't have to deal with the gatekeepers in Hollywood anymore. And that's scaring the fuck out of them. And then, of course, you've got all of these other cults that exist in Hollywood as well, right? The ones that potentially got Isaac Cappy killed, right? And I'm going to finish off with this, and then we're going to wrap this up. There's been rumors floating around about Steven Spielberg for years. And I mean, I have to make the distinction between Zionism and Jews in general. Like, not every not every Jew is a Zionist, and not every Zionist is a Jew, but apparently Steven Spielberg is a man who's completely committed to Zionism. So I mean, it's like, and there's a reason why Hollywood has such a strong Jewish connection, which I will sum it up and as quickly as I can here. The original film community, the Hollywood, the reason why LA ended up becoming the film mecca and not New York is because Thomas Edison drove out a certain segment of the film community. Like, he actually used thugs and goons to drive out a certain segment of the film community out of New York, and a lot of them happened to be Jewish, right? And they all moved out to LA, which was beyond Thomas Edison's reach. That's why there's such a strong Jewish connection in the film industry in LA, and then, of course, you have all the nepotism involved there. And then, of course, you've got race swapping and whatnot, but I mean, I've already covered that. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of hazards in LA that you had to normally navigate. And it's like, even if you went to LA or Hollywood and were seriously dedicated to your craft and to try to make it in Hollywood, I mean, you could bust your ass and you'd still not necessarily make it big because you didn't have the right look or you didn't have the right connections, or particularly in my case, I'm a bit of an introvert. I don't like socializing with a lot of people, right? That specifically has been one of the reasons why why the film career kind of flagged, and probably also potentially why the stuff online is also flagged a little bit. Like, there's a lot of other hazards happening in Hollywood beyond just the stuff that we've talked about that you have to deal with, on top of the pedophilia, on top of the wokeness, on top of everything else. And if you're going to go down that route with Hollywood, this is part of the reason why you've seen so many former filmmakers go into internet broadcasting like I did, is that at least, although they tried to do it with YouTube, but YouTube can't do it anymore, but at least if you're dedicated enough and you work hard enough and you keep making enough videos and you keep posting up enough content, you can actually grow your channel to the point where you can make a career out of it. And you don't have to worry about the gatekeepers. They tried to put in gatekeepers at YouTube, and it didn't work. Or it's slowly starting to not work. So, yeah. If you're going to get into, and then this is where I'll finish off. If you're going to get into the film industry, if you're going to get into the entertainment industry, and you've had a lot of people tell you, you're pretty, you should be down in Hollywood, you should be modeling or whatever, my suggestion is, unless it's something that you're seriously dedicated into becoming, like, unless you really want to be an entertainer, you're probably better off finding something else, because there's so much competition in LA, and there's so many predators, and it's just such a toxic environment. The city of Los Angeles itself is just toxic as hell, right? I'm not saying give up on your dream. What I am saying is that there are options available to you now that you didn't have 10, 15 years ago. that don't involve you having to deal with some type of a gatekeeper that you can explore, and you should maybe take a look at those, right? And ask yourself what fame means to you and whether it's going to be really this. Fame is a very fleeting thing. It's very fickle. It's nice to have, but it's very fickle, and it can turn on you. So yeah, you need to be asking yourself a few hard questions. Like, do I really want to do this? And like, how do I want to approach this? Do I want to go down into the Hollywood system, which is losing relevance, which is corrupt as fuck, which is woke, which is full of predators? Or do you want to go the internet route? But keep in mind, like, there's like, internet broadcasters are not paragons of morality. I mean, you then need look no further than than Mr. Beast or Destiny or some of the other people that have had the misfortune of coming across over the years, right? Vaush is another one, right? You do have the luxury, though, when you're doing the internet, of making your own content and building your own audience. And it's nice to see your audience grow organically. But it's up to you. I mean, I keep getting that itch to maybe shoot some live action again at some point because of my film background, because I did actually go to a very high-end film school. But in the end, it's me that determines. I get the advantage right now of having me be the decider of what my future looks like, not some guy sitting in an office in LA or Toronto or Vancouver or New York. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roger to take us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something else to that too about this actor thing. You don't have to go to freaking LA to get famous. Tyler Perry made freaking all of his career out of Kansas City. Eddie Griffin was a Kansas City local as well, who made it big without going to freaking LA. They actually invited him to LA after he had become famous. So if you want to get into the acting career, think locally, man. Do stuff in your local area, in your local community, and support your community before you decide to take off to LA to follow those stars. So with that, I mean, I have really nothing else to say. If you want to end it, you can.
Okay, well, this concludes the Spare Parts episode. This has been a couple of months in the making. I hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, we will, and we were going to cover Susan Wojcicki stuff. Yeah, Susan Wojcicki will be on 392. Yep, that's it. Thank you very much for coming in, and thanks for. I'm just glad to get this particular episode in the bag, so that I don't have to have it sitting on my tray anymore, because I got a lot of personal content that I want to finally get around to completing.
You did a good job.
Yeah. So, all right. So thanks everyone for listening to the end.